Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today's question about work is A, in the news you can use category, but B, in part at Champ's request and reminder, which was really valid. Neither of us is a mental health professional, even though we are going to talk informally about mental health. And also, like, honestly, two white guys talking about things to do when you're stressed. We probably have only a limited set of life experience. But for those of you who are here for the first time, I'm Roy, startup investor in the future of work. We've been fortunate to invest in Champ's company, which is called Capsule, and you should check it out. Many uses for it. And the question today is it's one that is I think it's as important as it is commonplace, which is like, I'm just feeling stressed. So what are some of the things that I can do? Would love to hear, Champ, what you figured out.
Yeah, so thank you for having me back, by the way. And yeah, I first want to just reiterate what you said at the top, which is that, like, this is personal advice, right?
Totally. Our experience, not advice. It's literally in the name. The disclaimer's in the name.
Yes, thank you. I think it's especially important when talking about mental health to kind of carve that aspect of it out. So I guess what I want to talk about is just sort of a couple of things that have worked for me, right? I've actually never been in therapy. I don't read a lot of books about this stuff. I have, however, been in highly stressful situations, especially in the last 10 years of my life around work. And I think being in startups especially tends to be a pretty stressful environment. You're operating on limited time, limited budget, limited resources, limited from basically every aspect of the word. And so I've managed to find some tools that have worked well for me. So when we're talking about feeling stress, for me, there are kind of two ways to alleviate stress. But I want to, one of them is just taking a wholesale break from work. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about, like, what can you do during the day, right? What is a 5-minute, 30-minute, maybe even a 30-second kind of break from the day to alleviate some kind of acute stressful situation that you're dealing with. And sometimes you can also do these sorts of things preventatively. And we're all human, so we don't sit around all day kind of creating stress out of thin air, even when we don't need to. So mental vacations. Let's talk about mental vacations. A mental vacation, the framework that I use for this is really something relatively simple that you can do that just kind of checks your brain out and sort of reoccupies, or, like, there's only, the human brain, there's only so many things that we can think about at one time, right? And so one way to kind of hack your brain is to just completely reoccupy yourself with something completely different. And one of my favorite things to do here, and this is actually something that my dad taught me, is to just, like, help other people. And this is sort of a unique one. People always think of, like, mental, like, I'm going to go do meditation, and like, that's very real. You should definitely do that. But helping other people is really an interesting way to reoccupy and reprogram whatever stress it is that you're feeling. And the reason for that is when you take on someone else's problem, it becomes sort of like a third-party problem, right? And third-party problems are way less stressful than first-party problems. And yet, when you help someone solve their problem, you get kind of the same reward that you would get.
Fascinating. I love that.
Problem, right?
How do you find, like, a quickly accessible problem of somebody else's to solve? Because I feel, by the same token, that, like, a lot of my day is solving other people's problems, and that's something that creates some of the stress, in part because I take it on as my responsibility to assist with their problem if it's somebody we've invested in or something like that. But I'm just curious, how do you find what kind of problem, and how do you find somebody else's problem on which to operate?
Yeah, well, when I was an engineer, I would do this by just be like, slide over to someone else's desk, like, hey, what are you working on? Can I help?
Yeah.
You do like pair programming and stuff like that.
Totally.
Which is just a great way to kind of, like, you're not sitting there, like, obsessed with your own
stuff in your own stuff.
Yeah, and you're working with somebody else.
I love that.
I think that's a good one. And then there's sort of like the outside of work version of this too, which is, like, help people who actually really need help. That might be donating some of your time to less fortunate people, that sort of thing.
Got it. What are some other things that you do for a mental vacation? Do you plan them in advance? Do you do them impromptu when you need them? Like, is this like an early warning system, or is it like every day, 3 p.m., I'm on vacation?
So, everyone will this is probably at the top of everyone's mental vacation list, but for me, like exercise is critical. Especially in the moments where I'm most stressed. So like if I'm in a fundraising process, for example, it's literally every day, 30 minutes. I have to do it. If I don't do it, it's like death, right? And so I do try to spend about 30 minutes a day exercising. And that might be as simple as taking a walk, might be going to the gym every day. Everybody has their own version of that. But again, it's something that like it sort of, occupies your mind enough that it takes away the focus on the things that are stressing you out.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been a lifelong process lifelong is actually an exaggeration. Probably only in the last 10 years did I become aware that this is a thing that you can actually get better at. And I feel like the kids these days, my kids, but also younger people in general, just know this stuff. It's just more in the culture, if you will. And I just started keeping a list and keeping track of the things that in my like self-care manual, if you will, were things that were working for me. And so I'm just going to actually open up my list right now and say that number one, stress, I believe, is often a phenomenon of the body. And I don't love to exercise. Like, it's just not something that I take to, unfortunately. I really wish I did. But I have found that like boxing for me is great because I feel fantastic afterward. It's like releasing. But then even something as simple as I once, it's a shitty thing to say, but when I gave a TED talk, the person from TED, like an interview beforehand, forced us all to do this slow breathing thing, which at the time I was like, this is fucking stupid. But then since then, Bryn Friedman, who's become a communications mentor of mine, she forced us to do 5 slow breaths. And by the end of it, your body cannot help it. It just downregulates. And in fact, somebody got me this thing, which is kind of absurd because it's like an $85 little tube. It's called a Camuso or something like that, whistle. And it basically is a metal short straw that you blow out of slowly. But if you blow out of it 5 times, which by the 5th time, I'm always like, this is dumb, I'm done with this. But then you force yourself to go through it. By the end, your body physically cannot be in as heightened a state of stress. And then, there's some prophylactic things like meditation, I do think really helps, but it doesn't really help in the moment. If I'm super stressed, it's not like go meditate and you feel better. It's being in a regular daily practice. The stuff that can sometimes work for me in the moment are things where I literally cannot occupy my mind in any other way. So cooking works for me in that way. Because like, it's very hard for me to do something else while cooking. Playing chess is something new that I'm really crappy at, but that I've learned work for me. So things that force you to be out of your mental place by virtue of doing something else. And a lot of people say like, play with your kids. I love playing with my kids. My problem with that is I can actually play with my kids while being preoccupied by work. And they know it. I mean, I have a whole blog post about it. My son called me on it. And so I actually think I need to de-stress so that I can approach my kids in a positive place as opposed to using them as a way to alleviate my own stress. So there's things that I've tried that have worked, things that haven't worked, but I think part of self-knowledge is each person having their own list. And I'll also just say one last thought, which is not all stress is created equal. The acute stress of something where you're like on a deadline on something needs to be managed differently from the chronic stress of like a parent is ailing or something like that. And, if you're in acute stress, like really having like awful distress, therapy, I've been in therapy on and off for 10, 11 years, something like that. Shit does work. It really works. Programs like the week-long program, like the Hoffman process, a bunch of people have done, I've done that are really useful. And so it is a trial and error process. Really privileged to get to try all these things, but even just slowing down your breathing, which everybody can afford to do, really goes a long way. So those are some of the things I've learned.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think that like, if there's one takeaway from this whole thing, it's that like, think about the framework. What is the thing that is going to occupy your mind completely and force you to kind of de-stress? That's it. And everybody's got their version of that.
I love that. Shifting your attention. Yeah, no, that's great.
Nope.
All right. Well, that's definitely, as you said, because we're not professionals. It is legally speaking, not advice. Therapeutically speaking, not advice, and even just informally speaking, we're just 2 guys sharing what's worked for us. So, Champ, let's do this many more times. Thank you very, very much. Always self-conscious doing this with a video professional, but nonetheless, to be continued.